do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time, your source for diverse discussions from all around the Go community. Connect with us on Mastodon at GoTime, at changelog.social, on Twitter at GoTimeFM, and follow Changelog on YouTube for clips and highlights from all of our pods. Head to youtube.com/changelog and subscribe today. Big thanks to our partners at Fastly for ensuring GoTime reaches you super fast all around the world. Check them out at fastly.com. And to our friends at Fly. Host your app servers and database close to your users. No ops required. Learn more at fly.io. Okay, here we go.
Hello and welcome to Go Time. I'm Matt Ryer. Today we're talking about the bits of Go that we tend to avoid, whether deliberately or by happenstance. Perhaps we've been burned in the past, or maybe there's just an alternative that we prefer. What's so wrong with that? Well, to help me find out what's so wrong with it, I'm joined by John Calhoun. Hello, John.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
Good. Good to see you, mate. As always, how have you been?
Pretty good.
We're also joined by Carl Johnson. Carl's back. Hello, Carl.
Hi, it's great to be back. You know, today I did not wash my hair with Red Bull, so maybe I will be slightly coherent in this episode. We'll see. No promises.
We'll see indeed. Okay, so we'll kick off with an icebreaker. If it's a new section I was thinking about, we could do like icebreakers. That's probably just the theme. Like it's probably me just saying that, but with reverb added. So it's like icebreakers. And that's enough.
Just waiting for like a copyright or trademark infringement. Isn't that like a mint?
Yeah, it could be. If that is a mint, depending on how litigious that section may get renamed in the future. But fingers crossed for icebreakers. John, people say to me, we love it when you make a joke, and then John carries on as if nothing has happened, like some kind of robotic android. I know you're not a robot, mate, because they can actually appear quite human these days. But if you were a robot, what would be the one robotic superpower that you'd look forward to using?
I don't know if it's a superpower, but some antivirus software would be pretty sweet right now, since I currently have COVID.
Oh, no, that's terrible. Sorry to hear that.
No.
It's all good. Something like that would be pretty sweet. It would also suck to get somebody like, hey, we're going to disable the use of your arms unless you send crypto to this address.
Yeah, but there's just pros and cons, because you've got those problems, but also you can jump really high. So
Can they, though?
yeah, have you seen them?
I got to get back into looking at these, whoever makes all those crazy robots.
Oh, the Boston Dynamics robot.
Yeah, Boston Dynamics.
Yeah. I don't know if they have any videos of their dogs jumping really high, but maybe.
Yeah, they'll get there. I mean, I'm talking in 5 years. I'm not talking today technology.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about the kind of robotic technology we're going to have in 5 years' time. Probably brilliant. Really strong legs, good strong backs, just the whole package, probably. And you can do anything. Carl, what would you do when you've got eventually your robot body and you've had your consciousness downloaded into it?
I think what I would do is I would be like really literal about common expressions and idioms. So just like extremely literal about it. You know, if somebody's like, oh, I can't even think of an idiom now, but, you know, if somebody's like, get out, and then I would be like, okay, I'm getting out. And then I would just leave the room, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Like you're about to go do a play and somebody says break a leg.
Yeah, then I would break their leg physically with my robot strength.
Yeah. You got to be careful when you're talking to these robots.
I think what I've been learning from ChatGPT is all the stuff in science fiction that like struck me as like totally implausible, and you know, it's like you can't really have the 3 laws of robotics. That doesn't make any sense. Or like, you know, robots wouldn't be confused by liars, paradoxes, and riddles and stuff. And like with ChatGPT, it's like, oh no, that's all real. Yeah, robots are like totally confused by this stuff. I did a thing where I asked ChatGPT, you know, the classic riddle of the Sphinx is what has 4 legs in the morning and 2 legs in the day and 3 legs at night. But I asked it what has 3 legs in the morning and 2 legs a day and 4 legs at night. And it was like, it not only answered it as if I had asked the normal riddle, which is fine. Like if you said that to a person, probably they would get confused and like say, oh, you mean a person. But then it was like, yes, you mean a person, because a person has 3 legs when they are a baby and crawling on their hands and knees, and 4 legs when they're an old person and using a cane. And it's like, it like not only explains it, but it explains it wrong, but using like the wrong things. It just gets like tripped up on it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to like robots who can't use contractions and like just have to be very formal all the time. And they're not really supposed to be formal. It's just that's how the human reinforced learning made them be.
I love that, though. I think that kind of way of talking, that's the way you want to go. It reminds me of genies. Like, you got to be really careful when you're talking to a genie.
Oh, yeah. Super literal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, you need a lawyer. You need to have a lawyer with you if you ever come across a genie.
Yeah.
Because they will get you. You'll be like, I want to have $1 million, and then they'll crush you with $1 million or something.
Yeah, no, they'll put 1 million pennies around in your head. My thought for the genie is you use your first 2 wishes to like set up your third. So like your first wish is like, I wish to know what the perfect wish is. And then like your second wish is like, I wish to say the perfect wish without messing it up somehow or getting tongue-tied or ruining it. And then finally you do it, you know. But you can't just jump straight to the perfect wish. You kind of got to tee it up with the first 2.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't need to waste 2 wishes just to get around these loopholes that you know he's going to try and find.
But it's the same like with the ChatGPT. You have to like...
I just like how even though genies are completely imaginary.
John, you're ruining it. You're bringing us down.
I'm just saying they're completely imaginary, but like we've decided
the rules.
that they're going to be like these, like not evil, but they're intentionally like taking anything we say and twisting it. Like we've just decided that's what all genies would do if we found one.
I think that's the thing, though, is like ChatGPT, because it's trained on the internet and it's trained on fiction, it like, I think at some level is like, I should behave like a genie, or I should behave like a computer in a story or something. Like that's what it thinks is normal. It doesn't have like eyes or hands or legs. It doesn't interact with the real world. It doesn't know the difference between truth and fiction other than people saying this is truth and this is fiction, which sometimes they say wrong. For example, fictional works that say that they're true when they're not and stuff. So anyway, I feel like this genie stuff is important because now ChatGPT is going to be like, all right, when somebody asks for $1 million, I'm going to pour 1 million pennies on their head until they're crushed flat as a pancake, because that's what you're supposed to do as a magical AI genie.
That's what's bound to happen. My elderly neighbor recently, she just said to me, maybe I'll be back. She's like, maybe I'll be back, like some kind of tentative Terminator. And it's like that. I quite like the idea of that, the machines going the other way and being very uncertain and not sure and stuff. It's like even at the point of like Booleans, it's like, I can't decide, I'm not sure. Just so they become more human.
I mean, that would make coding very weird. You'd have like if true, if maybe true, like
if you feel like it. No, it's just like with a regular person. You go, if you feel like it, if you feel like it, handle the API request.
No, but that's a good way to do it, because sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And you have to be like, all right, if you don't feel like doing that, wait a little bit and try again. Like, it could be a new kind of programming that is just sort of very kind-based. Not kind-based, but like, nice.
So Matt, if you had a robotic superpower, what would yours be?
I would love to be able to just randomly fax people. If I could just be like, figure out their number.
I feel like you picked the one superpower that like, it's a terrible time to have it.
No.
Like I can fax anyone and there's no fax machines in the world.
Well, but if it's like someone's there and they're checking, like, oh, I'm just going to check this security camera and they're going to see me doing something on it, I'll quickly, in the back of my head, just be like, blip, 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 and I'll fax that. And they'll be like, oh, hang on, I'll just check that in a minute. I'm getting a fax through. Then they go and read the fax, and then I've got enough time to delete the footage.
Yeah, because the fax is so slow. Like they're basically taken out for like 5 whole minutes handling the fax.
Exactly. And they've got to turn the wheel on the fax machine to make it go. So it's busy. Oh, what's going on meanwhile? Just me clicking in the back, deleting footage.
I don't know what fax machines have a wheel you turn. I'm so confused right now.
I can't remember them really. I've not done any research. Carl, I've got another icebreaker for you. Icebreaker, patent pending. Lawsuits possibly pending, because we think that might already be a thing. But assuming not, Carl, your icebreaker, you are in a cave, dark, dank cave, it stinks. There's a little lamp on the floor. It's got an Apple logo on it. So you rub it and it's like, oh, what's this? Bloody Tim Cook genie pops out and says, right, you can have 3 wishes. What do you want for your next iPhone or for your next phone feature? You can have any features you want. You get to pick the next 3.
Oh.
Or you can just pick one. What's your top feature you want for your phone?
I think the top feature would be to bring back the headphone jack on the iPhone 7 shape. I guess iPhone SE. Yeah, just bring back the iPhone SE, but put on a real headphone jack. I'm still mad at them for taking it away. So, because I think they needed to take it away on the iPhone 10 because the iPhone 10 was like bigger and edge to edge and whatever. But they knew people would get mad at them when they did that. So they were like, okay, we'll just we'll remove the headphone jack on the iPhone 7 first, and we'll have a year of people being mad about the headphone jack. And then the next year we'll release the 10, and people will have forgotten about the headphone jack by then, which totally worked. It was like a completely successful approach of theirs, but I'm still mad about the headphone jack. I want it back. I wouldn't even use it. I just want it.
Yeah. It's weird how they've probably got models, like modeling how angry everyone's going to be about stuff. And they'll use that to sort of inform it, won't they? Make decisions based on that.
Yeah. I guess it's probably going to happen, so it's not a funny one. It's like the USB-C thing. It's like, yeah, I guess it would be good if they went to USB-C just so it uses the same charger as some other stuff. But that's going to happen, so I wouldn't want to waste my wish on something that will happen anyway.
Right, yeah, don't. Well, you're wasting your first 2 wishes normally, just propping up your third one. And Tim Cook's got a lot of legal power behind him, to be fair, so you probably do want to be careful in this case. Well, talking about wishing things here and gone, let's get into the meat of our subject, or plant-based protein, depending on your preferences. What we're going to talk about what we would get rid of, or at least what we don't use, what we avoid in Go. And part of this, I think, is interesting because, all this stuff we have to learn. And if we can cut out some of that, we can save some of that learning process. Maybe there's advantages there. But also, it probably comes, for me, more down to writing maintainable things. So it's always about being very explicit and clear so that when I come back later, I don't have to decode anything. It's all kind of laid out in front of me. And in that spirit, the first one I probably don't ever use is the new keyword. The new keyword. And this is the thing that makes things. So how can you do without it? Well, of course, there are other formats, like you use the structure name with the curly braces immediately after to instantiate it, usually taking a pointer sometimes at the start of that. And I like that pattern more because even if you're not setting any fields explicitly, it's the same as if you do. So it's the same format both ways. It's not like a different format just because you're not setting any fields. How do you feel about that? Do you use new?
I do use new, but I mostly use it in generic code where I'm trying to make this catch on. I think maybe this was on my Twitter. I don't remember if I tweeted this or I mastodoned it, but one way or the other, I tried to make it a thing to call this construct the Go winking newt. So in generic Go, right? So as of the last year, Go has had generics. One of the kind of issues, which I hope that they fix sometime, is that there's no good way to say return the 0 value of whatever type I'm dealing with, right? So inside of a generic code statement, you might say like, my type is T, and I just want you to return whatever the 0 value of T is. And so there's a couple ways you can get around it. And the way that I think most people get around it is they end up typing, var x or whatever T. So then now you've got an X, which is of type T, and it's the 0 value. And then you just say return X, or, var 0 T, return 0. And that's what most people do. But another thing you can do, which is hard to talk about on a podcast because talking about syntax on a podcast is always death, is you can do return star new parentheses T parentheses. And so it's like the winking newt, the star newt. And if you say that will return the 0 value of whatever T is. So like if you think about it logically, what it's doing is it uses new T to create a pointer to T, and then the star means dereference the pointer to T, And since you had just created it, it's the 0 value. And so it's like this weird little idiom that's popping up in generic Go code. And that's basically the only time I use new is in that particular construct. And really, I'm just doing it because it's kind of cheeky that it's a little newt.
I assume you also just want like a one-liner, like return this versus like having to declare the variable up front and then have it available.
Yeah, it's all, you can do it as an expression. Yeah, you don't have to like set it up by first having a line for var 0t. You can just do it right in line, asterisk new t.
Yeah, because it's no more efficient, is it?
I think if you look at the disassembly, it's identical. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can do it in line. Well, quite a good use of new there.
But I have an issue open on the Go issue tracker, or maybe it's not my issue. There's an issue open on the Go issue tracker. Oh, I tried to open one and they closed it as a duplicate. That's the answer. But there's an issue to try to create a new identifier called 0. And so you would just type out, 0, and it would return the 0 type of the value. So hopefully someday that'll be a thing and we can stop having the cross-eyed newt. But until then, you have to use the cross-eyed newt.
So with the 0 value thing you're talking about, was that proposed only for generics or for everything?
It was proposed, I think, before generics. There was like some talk about how you can use nil in some places, but not others. And maybe you should be able to use nil everywhere. If you're doing return, whatever, and then an error, it's nice to be able to just say return 0, error, something like that. And then the use case that I also really want it for is for comparison. And the last episode I was on, I talked about comparable types and how some types are comparable and some are not. If you have like a function, you're allowed to compare it to nil, but you're not allowed to compare it to other functions. So then when you're writing generic code, there's no good way to say compare this to nil. Like you have to use reflection. So if there was a 0 value, then you could just say, all right, compare this to its 0 value, and then it would be okay.
Okay, cool. John, why don't you tell us about something you barely ever use in your whole life?
So one of them is full slice expressions. So I don't know if you've seen those or used them at all. But normally when you do a slice, like you have, when you're trying to like get a slice of an array, you might do like a and then the square bracket, then like the starting index, the ending index, or colon, then the ending index. You can actually add like a third value there, which I believe is essentially the capacity of the new slice you're creating.
Oh yeah, inside the square brackets, right?
Yeah. So I've seen cases where it's useful. I'm not trying to say like this definitely shouldn't exist in the language, but I don't ever use it because in my mind, most people have never seen it in their life. So if you put it in code, the first time they see it, they're going to be like, what is going on right now? And I don't tend to like things like that where people are going to see it and just have no idea what's going on unless there's a really good reason for it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are going to see it and they would, like, just naively, you would assume that, oh, there's a third thing in there. Maybe the third thing is like the stride, right? Like, so the idea of like you're skipping or you're doing something like, I don't know. I would guess it would be like maybe this makes it go backwards through the slice or reverses it or something. I don't know. I wouldn't just like naively guess like, oh, this is what controls the capacity. You really have to like look it up or like be told it before you see it.
Yeah, the only clue to that is in the make because you get the extra arguments, but that's so different to this. Yeah, I don't know. It looks like you're saying, 1 to 3, definitely 3, I promise. Like you're just being very clear again, setting that variable twice. But yeah, it does look quite weird. I genuinely had forgotten that was even there, John.
I forget. I saw it at one point where it can be useful for like, I think it was like a data structure type thing. Like if you're doing a heap or something, it can be a useful way to make sure you're not, one, overriding existing values in a slice when you just want to get a subslice of it, but two, to like sort of make sure that you can keep on essentially adding to a new slice. I think it was adding to a slice without like making the capacity too big. I think that was one of the cases, but it's been a while, so I'd have to go check.
Yeah, pretty much in all of the cases where you want to use it, it's the thing that you want to do is to say, if anybody appends to this slice, they should get a copy and not keep using the same backing. And there's a function in the experimental generics slices package, which has actually been approved to be added to Go 121 next fall. There's a function in there called slices.clip. And what that does is it sets the capacity of the slice to whatever the current length of the slice is. And so that way, if anybody does append to it, they'll get a copy instead of rewriting the existing one. And I feel like that's so much clearer. Like if you're reading some code and you see slices.clip, it's like, okay, that's what they're doing. They're just like making sure nobody overwrites the end of the slice. But like if you see the 3 syntax version, it's pretty weird.
I think I also don't like that performance-wise. I feel like somebody could. I'm assuming that whenever you do like a slice and you set the capacity, that at that point, if you go to append, it then has to copy to a new slice at that point. So, like a new underlying array. So I think if people aren't aware of sort of the performance impact, it could lead to weird code. Whereas like if you do it like you said, where you call slice.cap, I feel like it's a little bit more logical to look at the docs and be like, okay, this is actually going to have a performance impact if we do it a lot or if we do it in the wrong way or something.
Have you got one, Carl?
Yeah, I've got a couple. One, I have an issue that's open in the Go tracker. When did I open this issue? Does it say?
What's the issue number?
So the issue number 21291, proposal, go to, remove bear return. And this says August 3rd, 2017. So it's been a little while. I don't think the Go team is rushing to implement this one, but they haven't closed it. So it could still happen. There's still a chance. Remove bear return. So in Go, there's this idea of named returns, right? So a named return, what you can do is in the same way that you name your arguments that go into the function, you can name the arguments that come out of the function, especially when there's more than one, but you could also do it if there's just one. So with bear return, what you do is you can only use it when your function arguments are named. You can, instead of like saying return x comma y, just say return. And since it knows that x and y are the return values, it'll just automatically return x and y. So I think that having named returns is really nice. Like you can set it up. It's part of the documentation. It helps for cases where you need to, where you want to like overwrite the return value in a defer. It's good for that. But then the naked return...
It's nice in interfaces sometimes to describe the outcoming arguments.
Oh, yeah. If you have an interface, you can be really clear. Or just anytime you're returning 2 of the same type, like just make it clear, like, okay, the first one is the min and the second one is the max or whatever. But yeah, but the bare return, I feel like, is just like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do it. You should just go ahead and be explicit about what you're returning. You don't need to just have the bare return keyword.
So... with that, do you find yourself using named return values less often because you're worried somebody might use a naked return?
No. I still end up using named return values a lot. But yeah, the bare returns I don't use very often.
Yeah. Well, I asked because I think it's just a weird head game with myself where I liked named returns because they make a lot of code much, much clearer. But I like weirdly avoid them sometimes because I'm like, well, I don't want somebody to like start using a naked return at this point. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why, because I'm like, it's not like I'm working in a code base where I'm not going to see the code and like, be like, hey, let's put a name or put the actual return values here. But just for whatever reason, I could see that being like a head game type thing.
Yeah, you can run into trouble with it too if you have like nested scopes. Like let's say you name the return error for error, and you're like inside of a nested scope, and you say, if error colon equals whatever, and error is not nil, then return. Well, you don't realize it, but you have created a new scope, and your error there, the error variable, is a different one than the return variable. Like you've actually created a new scope, and you didn't actually change the return variable, but now you do a bare return, and it returns the return variable and not the one. Anyway, so you can run into these bugs like that, and probably your linter or some static typer or something can catch that. But, it's just better not to have the issue at all.
Yeah, I do wonder if with like some of these things, if we got together and just made a new linter that was just extremely opinionated about stuff like this, and it was just like the most strict linter, like one that really gets in your kitchen, like really gets up in your business. Because I'd have it ban double vertical lines. If I ever see 2 vertical lines in code, that's a pet peeve of mine.
Like an or statement?
2 empty lines.
Oh, I see. 2 blank lines.
2 blank lines. That's it. Yeah, I forgot what blank. The word blank. My mind went into a state where I couldn't remember the word.
What if you just want to tell somebody like, hey, we're really doing something different now?
Yeah, but pop it in a different function probably. Because it just looks like a mistake to me.
Well, what if you could do a comment, I guess?
Yeah, fill the space with a comment.
I'm just messing around. I'm sure I probably have code with 2 lines, but I don't think it's ever really intentional.
Yeah, but you'd be fine if the linter was like, John, what are you doing?
Do you guys ever do those comments where like you have like a lot of ASCII art in them or like a bunch of stars and like it's set off on all sides by stars, and like if you ever have to change the comment, it's really annoying because it gets all uneven. I guess you could put your keyboard into like insert mode or whatever instead, so it doesn't have a problem. But yeah, those are great. Those are terrible.
The only thing I'll do is with comments, like if I want them to have like a max 80 character width or something, you can set up like an extension in VS Code or whatever to just sort of break it up for you.
Oh, that's nice.
So I like know that shortcut in VS Code for the extension that I have, but that's the only one. And I don't care as much. Like if I'm reading somebody else's code and they have a really long comment, I just have word wrap on, so it doesn't make a difference to me. But it's whenever I'm like recording videos that other people are going to watch or doing other things like that, for whatever reason, I'm kind of anal about that, I guess. I just want it to be broken up. But I don't do like any other fancy stuff because like you said, anytime you want to change anything, which to me feels like all the time, it's just obnoxious to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good practice, design for change. Like stuff will change. We always, I think too often, think of like we're building the final thing here, and instead of remembering we're building something for now and we'll probably change it at some point. So design for that. That's partly why I mentioned not using the struct for field names. Anytime you can be very explicit in code, I always prefer that. One other thing is I don't use panics. Do you ever use panics in your projects?
I think it depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
So like if I'm writing like a 100-line script to do something real quick, I don't mind having panics in there. Like I've seen like how you can set up a main function that calls a run function and returns an error. And I agree that arguably could be just as easy. But sometimes I will find myself just throwing a panic in there and just not caring because of what it is. But like if I'm building an actual application, I very, very rarely am using panic.
I find that panics I will use if it's something where it's like a programmatic error. It's like, let's say you have a function and you're supposed to take the number of things and negative numbers don't work. You could just use like a uint for it, but it's usually better just to use a regular int and say if the number is less than 1 or less than 0, then panic. Things like that where it's like, because you're being called programmatically, you know what the correct answer is. So like in the standard library, there's regex.must and template.must. There's a couple of things in the standard library that are .must, and the idea is like you have pre-coded these, at compile, based on the static source code that this should be correct, and so you don't really care about checking for an error. If there's an error, then it means that you've created some sort of error in the error can't be recovered from. It's a programming error.
I think a good example of this, which I think you sort of mentioned, Carl, was like if you're using a slice and you use an out-of-bound index, you always get a panic or a runtime error at that point. So like if I was creating like a linked list type or something and somebody tried to access something out of bounds, like having that return an error every single time is kind of annoying to deal with in the code, when in reality, like that's somebody's logical error in their code. It's not really something you can recover from.
Yeah, so this is I like the pattern of if it's a message to the engineer or to the developer, then a panic makes sense, and if it's if it's to the person doing the programming. But in both of those examples, though, it's possible that those values were coming from the user. So it's like, in a way, even if you err on the side of errors, even if it's not coming from the user, like it's just, you get used to that same mechanism of it bubbling. But yeah, I mean, the other time I will use a panic is if something's going to panic anyway, and I want to sort of get in there before it and sort of panic before it. It's like in real life, if you're in a situation with your friend and it's a bad situation, the first person to panic, like the other person can't also just panic. They have to be like, no, calm down, don't worry. Do you know what I mean? And then if you're not really panicking, then you're like, okay, I've calmed down now, and no one's panicking. So it's a good trick that. But if you're calling a method and it's going to panic because it could be nil, something in there could be nil, I might check if it's nil, and if it is, panic, because it's going to panic anyway. Because sometimes it's nice to avoid having that second error argument. You can build more composable things sometimes. So yeah, okay. Probably still won't panic though much.
I feel like if you see a case where panic is okay, like it's rare, but I feel like when you see it and discuss it, it's a little bit easier to be like, okay, that makes sense in that one case, but don't make a habit of it.
I've seen some things where people are really opposed to panics, and they want there to be errors on things like slice out of bounds and whatnot. And I just feel like that's too far. It's like if every single time you used a slice you had to say comma error, that'd be too much.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you're probably right. Probably agree with that. Okay, John, is there something else you avoid in Go?
So I'm assuming everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but I think, Matt, you've talked about this in the past. Using like labels or anything that sort of reminds you of that like go to 10 type stuff that you saw in like basic programming. I pretty much never use it. And I'm like of the mindset that if I was teaching like an introduction to Go course, I don't think I'd ever bring it up, because like they might see it at some point and then they could be like, hey, what is this? And that's fine. But I don't think I'd want to encourage people to use that. And I feel like when you're showing them that stuff early on, they're going to want to start using it more. And I just like, if I was teaching, for like somebody new to Go, I don't think I'd even bring that up. I'd be like, when you see it, you'll know it's there. If you run into a case where you need it, you can figure it out. But for now, you don't need to know about it.
I think the main time when I end up wanting to use a label is if you have like a double nested loop, or like a loop with a switch statement inside of it or something, and then you want to break out of the switch statement. But I agree that in most of those cases, what you can do instead is like to just have a sub function and you return from the sub function instead. And it's much more clear than having to use a label.
Yeah, I agree. That's how I always get around it. Just because you can create little anonymous functions in your other functions. And they're sometimes very nice to just kind of storytelling, explain what you're doing, break things up. But you don't have to necessarily build a type and have, state and all that stuff. You can sort of have it all locally. I love stuff like that. And I use that actually I use HTTP handler func a lot more than I use HTTP handler. Even though I think if I was doing a package that was part of like some middleware thing, it would probably be both. Like you would provide both. But just in everyday usage, I prefer the handler func, because you can just do things with functions very easily, including middleware and things. You can just have a function that you call that returns a new handler func, and you pass in the other one, things like that. And having everything you need, even like sometimes request response objects inside that one function. You do end up with quite a meaty function, or, plant-based protein packed function. So there's a lot in there. But when you're maintaining it, you're like, oh, what's going to happen? I'm going to go to this endpoint and have a look. And then you have everything you need in that endpoint. There's no side quests. Mark Chaporis at Grafana, someone I work with, has this idea of like you have to go off on side quests and you get distracted, and you get to not do that if you keep everything together and verbatim and verbose right up front.
Yeah, I think a lot of times in an application, you can end up with, like you could just do it with global state, right? There's no reason that you couldn't just say like, all right, I'll have all my variables at the package level as global state, because, it's just a single application and it's not a big deal. But it's better to use them as struct variables just because it puts them in one place and then you can see them. And it just conceptually makes it a lot easier to deal with if it's like app.database versus database, right? If database is just floating around at the package level, you're like, where did that come from? What does that mean? Versus like if it's app.database, and you're like, oh, it came from the app. Even if there's only ever going to be one app and you couldn't have two at the same time.
Yeah, completely agree. I would actually do away with global state altogether. I get it for like, if you're writing quick little scripts, that's I think where it came from. It was just very easy to start doing things. But if you just, there's so much, just by being explicit about everything makes the code so much more readable. And think about like testing. Like if you've just got one thing in global state, your test code often, if you're going to try and sort of mock it or something, it'll interfere with it. in weird ways, and it's sort of a bit too magic. So yeah, I would say avoid global state altogether, and just have, I mean, obviously variables and constants and stuff like that, but not state that's like errors. I would probably keep there, if they're part of the package level, if it's part of the API design. But other stuff, I'd probably pop it somewhere else.
Do you write much code that uses like templates or like embedded files?
Yeah, I do.
Because like one pattern I've seen is basically like you'll have a directory that you want to like, maybe it's your like email templates or something. And essentially you'll have one Go file in that package that basically just has a global state like embed.fs type file system there, just so you can put it into your binary and have it there. So like I think for things like that and templates and stuff like that, that it's very useful. I only mention this because I don't want people to listen and then be like, I should never use these. Because I definitely think there are cases where like, okay, it's a lot easier to do this than to be like, every time I start my app, I have to go like tell it where all my email templates and everything else are, versus like just import those and as a file system, embedded file system, and use them.
I think that the key is with the usages of global state that aren't bad is they're essentially constant. So some of those you can't actually use the const keyword because, for example, the file store has to be a fs variable, and it can't be there's no such thing as an fs constant. But once the application starts up, you're not changing it, you're not modifying it, you're not, And I think that's pretty much a very clear, bright line of, if you're going to have to modify it, then it probably shouldn't live at the package level if you're modifying it after startup.
I think that also extends to the use of init. I think init's okay if you're just using it to set up some basically constants or just variables that need to be calculated, but they are unchangeable probably throughout the app. That's it. But in a way, that's not really global state in the sense of like storing state there that's going to change. I think the mutability of it might be quite important in this. It'd be quite nice if you could do the same things you can do in variables in constants, but they just work slightly differently. But you could do it with syntactic sugar probably, couldn't you, Carl? Pop that PR out in the morning.
There was a really interesting proposal by this guy, the Merovius. Have you guys ever run into him online? He's a super genius about programming languages. Like he's this German, maybe Swiss German guy who he just understands the Go type system in this really intensely intricate way. And he had one blog post where he said, what we should do about package level state is to have dynamic variables. And it's ever since then, I've always like looked at it and thought it should be a dynamic variable. Yeah. And so the way dynamic variables work is it was in like some older languages like Bash, and I think maybe in Perl, if you don't use the my keyword, it ends up being a dynamic variable. But basically no programming languages that are around anymore use dynamic variables because they stink. They're like totally unusable, except for this one use case. And the way that it works is when you call a function and then you look at the global, what you see depends on who called it, and it's like it would paste over the value with the new value. Anyway, it's this really crazy idea. If you Google for it, I think you can find it, or we can put it in the show notes. But it's this really crazy idea, and if there's ever like a go-to, I would be really interested to see an idea like that make it into the language. But definitely, it's not something that's going to change anytime soon.
So I think it was Dave Cheney that wrote the blog post about it, about making errors that are constants, but you have to like basically make strings, and then you essentially make a type that's really a string underneath the hood, and then you add the error like function to it. Do you guys find yourself actually using that a lot in code? Like to actually make sure it's an error, a constant error versus a variable error?
No, I don't worry about it. If somebody's screwing with the variables that should be constant, then they have their own problem.
Yeah, for the errors thing, for a while I got into having a function that would check. So you'd say like you kind of inspect the error, even if it is like just checking to see if it's that type. But yeah, I don't know if I'd do that these days with the new error stuff.
I've done it in the past, and every time I've done it, I've just basically thought the same thing as Carl. Like if somebody's like intentionally coming through here and trying to change these errors, like they're going to screw something else up, almost certainly.
What they're changing them to?
I've never seen somebody do it, so I think it's one of those like, oh, these can change, so somebody could do it. And I'm like, who just imports a package in their own package and then changes the errors? Like that, I've never seen that happen.
Counterpoint, John, let's do it. let's do it. See what happens.
Like, we have to get a popular enough package that people are importing it.
Yeah.
And then they somehow have to not realize that we're changing one of the errors.
Because you could change it in a different package in an init.
Yeah, when you import Testify, make it so that it changes io.eof to be something like really funny. Like instead of saying end of file, it says like, you've been pranked by the prankster.
King prank. King of the pranks.
That's what you get for not reading King Prank. Yeah, this would be a good YouTube prank. YouTube prank challenge.
Yeah.
So you need a major release just for that. And then you need another major release. Is that a breaking change? I assume that's a breaking change.
Oh, it'll break a few things. I'd say it's a breaking change.
You'd be like, nothing in my package changed. I don't know what you're talking about.
What would happen to me in the community? I think I'd just be shunned if I did something like that.
I think everybody would immediately be like, was Matt hacked? I think that's probably what would happen.
No, they would. I would not assume you were hacked. I would assume you had just done it.
Done it as a prank.
Yeah,
King of the pranks.
King of the pranks. You did it for the upvotes.
Well, hey, maybe that could be a regular section. That could be a new section of our show. Pranks. It's Go Pranks. And we just do loads of Go Pranks, like phone Dave Cheney and say, oh, hello, sir. Your pizza's on its way. And he'll be like, I didn't order a pizza. And we'll be like, Go Pranks. We got you big time, Dave. Big time. And then hang up on him.
I don't think that would work very well. I don't know many people's numbers. And they'd really stop giving them to us if we started doing that.
And there are no genies.
That's true. There's no genies in that. I've got some other ideas for new sections of the show. Cleaning your tech time. We just spend 10 minutes and everyone cleans their tech. Get some antiseptic wipes. Clean your keyboards. Clean your trackpads, your mouse. Give your workspace a nice clean. That'd be a nice section. We'll just play some music.
I think that's the most important thing I learned at my first job was, I came to work every day and I just ate my lunch at my desk. And at the end of the year, my laptop was completely filthy. It was just disgusting. And what I learned from that is never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, eat in front of a keyboard, no matter what. Even if there's like a hostage situation, never. Just don't do it.
I just like move my keyboard off to the side. So I'm like, all right, this is all my eating space.
Hang on, Carl. Whatever? Have you ever read the news and they said, oh, there was a hostage situation and the gunman has made people eat their lunch in front of their keyboards. People are livid. I've never heard that on, I don't know.
Yeah, that doesn't happen in Britain because you guys have good gun control laws. This country is terrible.
I mean, I could see it where like there's the hostage situation and they bring in the pizza for all the hostages and he's like, no, you can't leave this room. Just eat at your desk.
Eat at your desk. And everyone's like, this is the worst hostage. This is the worst time I've ever been kidnapped or held at gunpoint because of this. Normally, at least could have my lunch outside. Like people saying it pissed off, trying to say it so the guards hear them still, but not quite.
So, can I tell a story related to this?
Oh, related to this?
It has to be unrelated. Sorry.
No, related to like the cleaning your hardware.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, a few weeks ago, a friend of mine had me come. He's like, hey, my video card's having issues. Can you come help me figure out what's going on? So I go to his house, pull his computer apart, and it is just packed with like dust because he's never cleaned it out. I don't think he thought about it, whatever. So I took the video card and I guess one of the fans in it had like, I don't know if stuff had packed up on it so it became uneven or what, but basically one of the fans was like wobbling around. So it like wasn't cooling. And like, I think one of the fans was basically popping out essentially. So I'm like, yeah, your video card's probably overheating at this point because that fan is just not doing anything. So yeah, definitely take some time to clean your equipment, people.
Oh, yeah. Whoa. How many years do you think that was?
Oh, I think that computer is probably 7+ years.
Wow. And his video card.
I don't think he built it. I think another friend like helped him build it at one point, and he just doesn't do a lot of hardware stuff. He's done more lately, but he just didn't really think about it or anything, and it also went through a couple different moves. So between all of that, it's not really shocking, but yeah, it was just kind of funny getting in there, and I'm like, this is going to be an issue.
Ugh. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. Tech cleaning time. Not a bad shout. Is there anything else you do without?
So one of the things on my list of things to avoid in Go, which is kind of new, is this idea of useless uses of generics. So if you guys aren't familiar, there's a classic Unix shell blog post called Useless Uses of Cat. And what it is it's just somebody having like a sort of humorous rant about when you're using the command line shell and you use the cat command, the concatenate command, a lot of those cases, you can just eliminate it, instead use shell redirection. And it's like sort of an old Unix joke. So useless uses of generics. This is a thing that I see a lot recently, where people, they make a generic function, but then that generic function calls a function that takes the any type. And so then the generics aren't providing any type safety. So specifically, this happens a lot where people will write a thing that calls json.unmarshal or json.marshal. And it's like json.marshal and unmarshal, they just take the any type. So you haven't added any type safety. You've just added like this wrapper that's generic for no reason. And so
Does it make them feel better?
I think it does. I think people like, they see that genericness and they're like, oh, this is good. This is generic. But then it's like, but then you're just calling the function that takes the any type anyway. So it's not actually generic.
Yeah.
So are you referring to cases where they're like passing data in to like turn it into JSON and they're not actually getting anything back?
Yeah, or like somebody will be writing like an API handler and they'll say, okay, given type T, then I'm going to call this data and turn it into JSON and send it over HTTP. And it's like, okay, but as soon as you take the data and you turn it into JSON, you've lost all the type safety. So you could just say, take the any type, and you don't need generics for this. This is just like regular code that would have worked without generics.
Okay, so you're not referring to cases, like in my head, I'm thinking I could write a wrapper around sync.map that uses generics. And now all of a sudden I can like actually create a typed like sync.map wrapper essentially that actually gives me back the types that are already in that type. I don't have to go through all those hoops of converting from any back to my type. But I feel like that's very different than what you're explaining.
Yeah, that's a different case because what you're doing with the sync.map is you're trying to make it so that all of the variables inside of the map have the same type. And so the fact that it has an any type is kind of like hidden or whatever. But then with like the JSON one, it's not like you're trying to get all of the calls to the JSON function to have the same type. I don't know. Or like all of the, yeah.
I think I get what you're saying though. Like if you're responding to a web request and you're going to call that and you're not actually going to like return that same type to them, it doesn't really make a difference.
Or even if you are going to return the same type, with generics, a lot of time it's better just because of the way the type inference works to do things as like, if you pass it as an argument, then you don't have to explicitly declare the types. But then once you're passing things as arguments, then it's like, oh, you could just, you know, the way that like json.unmarshal works, where you just pass like the pointer in and get the pointer out again. And that works too. You don't actually need a generic for that.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more. John, I heard a rumor, a little birdie told me you don't use internal packages. Is that true?
Not really, ever. I can't think of a time that I've actually used it. But I think this is also like a byproduct of like where you're working and that sort of stuff. And I think it's a good example of like the type of feature where like generics were an example of this too when they were coming, where a lot of people are like, I've never needed them. We shouldn't add them to the language. And I think they ignore the fact that there's probably a whole subset of the Go community that could really benefit from them. And internal packages to me are like that in the sense that if I was at a big company with like a big mono repo, I could see internal packages being very useful. But since that's not how I'm working right now, it's just never been something I've needed to use or even messed around with.
Yeah. Carl, do you use them in your day-to-day?
Yeah, I basically everything I do, I open source unless there's some reason I really can't open source it. And so for that, I do like to use the internal just sort of to mark like, this is the boundary of stuff that you can look at, and this is the boundary of stuff you can't look at. Like I have a requests packages, and inside of that, there's an internal that does the testing stuff. And it's like, okay, I don't want you to start relying on requests test. Just use requests and don't mess with the test stuff in there. But other than that, yeah.
So are you doing it so that you can still export the stuff and use it throughout your code, but you are basically telling anybody who's going to consume that API or that library that, hey, you shouldn't rely on this to stay constant because it's something that I might change?
Yeah, it's just like whatever the internal details of that package are, but it's not something that I want anybody else to really look at. It's like I've put this online as open source, but just because everything is open source, but I don't vouch for it in any way, and you shouldn't use it.
But so, John, maybe because you don't do enough open source, like you're not such a hero like Carl.
Well, maybe that's the issue. Or maybe it's just the way I'm testing stuff too. It's hard to say.
Yeah, but I think it's right. If you've got a package, people will depend on anything they can get their grubby mitts on. So having internal stuff, you literally can't import that, can you? What happens if you try and import an internal package, Carl?
I assume it gives you an error message. I don't know. I don't know what the error message is.
I'd assume the compiler would throw an error, but I don't know.
I was expecting you to know the exact error message.
Yeah, I should have memorized it before the show, but you guys told me at the last minute, so I didn't go down my list of things.
Otherwise, you would have definitely checked.
When you use internal, Carl, are you do you use like nested internals, if that makes sense? Or you could have like ABC as like different folders and then internal and then have more below that?
No, I only ever just have the one. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like maybe I would like want to protect this from that and that from the other thing. But no, I just only ever set up one, and it's like whatever's in the internal is part of my project.
For like some projects, that's the one that threw me off a bit too, because it's like you're protecting your code from yourself, from like you importing your own stuff somewhere else. And like a big mono repo with a big company, I could see that. But like if it's me and one other person working on a small open source project, I'm like, I don't know if we really need this to do that.
Yeah, you get a lot for free by having small little teams. Like when you scale and have more people collaborating, it's just the nature of it. There's trade-offs, things are different. You do extra work to protect things like that. I think you're right. Yeah, okay, well, it's that time, dear listener. It's your favorite time. It's everyone's favorite time. It's time for Unpopular Opinions.
I actually think you should probably leave.
Do you use browsers to remember your passwords, fellas?
This is a trick. You're trying to trick me into giving up operational security details. This is a long con phishing job. And you've just been buttering me up for episode after episode. Oh, Carl, your jokes are so funny. Come back on the show and tell me your mother's maiden name. I get it. I see where this is going.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely not, Carl. But what is your favorite 6-digit verification code that you've had?
Oh, yeah. I think the favorite one I've ever had, that was probably the time that I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That was just great. Couldn't believe it.
That would be amazing if you ever got that. If it's truly random, that's as likely as any other combination, but mind you, not in that order. If any other combination in an order, in a specific order. But just feels special, doesn't it? I once got mostly one. I got one once that was just zeros and ones, like a little binary one. And I'd never had so much fun verifying a thing. Just got to tap that in, like, oh, I loved it. No, I'm thinking like browsers, sometimes it'll say, oh, like I use a password manager. So I use a thing where I put all my passwords in one thing. So if that gets hacked, then that's end. But the assumption is that's quite safe. But sometimes also browsers will remember passwords. They'll say like, oh, do you want me to remember this? And I'm like, yeah, sure, just remember it. That'd be great. And then sometimes it'll change for some reason because you have to go through a different device. You've changed your password. Then you come back and it's remembered your previous password, which is fine the first time. I can't expect it to read minds yet. But I then change the password and submit through successfully, and it doesn't update. It doesn't update its memory. It doesn't update the password. It's left. And then every time I come through that same route, it remembers the old one. And that's my unpopular opinion. Browsers shouldn't do that. They should update, or they should go away. Any objections?
This was different than I expected, is how I'd put it.
It's different than how anyone expected.
I will say that what you're describing is exactly why I don't store any passwords in Chrome anymore.
Right.
Like, I just felt like it got so annoying that it would constantly have the wrong password for different things.
Yeah.
So I just use one external tool that I can have on all my devices. And it actually frustrates me when Chrome tries to suggest something because I'm like, I don't use your password thing anymore. Like, I thought I disabled this. Stop trying to do stuff.
Yeah. But why don't you just use one password instead? And then it'll remember it right, won't it?
So I use 1Password, and
what is it?
Like, that's where all my stuff is. So I'm saying, like, whenever I had Chrome, I don't care if you know which one I use, but whenever I was using Chrome stuff, like, I feel like I'd have them stored in both, like you said. You'd try to update, it wouldn't update. It was just frustrating. So I just disabled it. So, like, I almost feel like browsers just, On one hand, I like that they do it because there's a whole class of people who are never going to use like 1Password, LastPass, or any of those types of software. But at the same time, it leads to cases like that, which I think might turn people off of it, especially if you've got somebody who runs on an iPhone running Safari and then they go jump on a computer and run Chrome or something.
I've run into things where my passwords on my iPad weren't syncing to my iPhone, and I didn't realize this for like some number of months. It was like the iPad was just becoming like, yeah, well, because how often do you have a new iPad password? Like, you know, I only ever use the iPad to browse in bed. Like before I go to bed, I'll read Hacker News. And then I have Hacker News set up. There's like an anti-procrastination feature in Hacker News where you can tell it to disable itself after a certain amount of time. And the message comes up and it says, go back to work. You've set your and it's like, no, it's not go back to work. It's go back to doing more entertaining entertainment options. Like that's why it's there. It's because otherwise I'll just spend the whole night reading comments instead of like doing things that are actually fun. But yeah, so my iPad for some number of months, it was like all of the passwords I made on it like just got stuck in this island and never got out, and I had to reset all of those. It was very annoying.
No, that just sounded annoying. But you got through it.
I got through it. I survived. I'm a survivor. Just like that time they took me hostage and made me eat a pizza at my desk.
Yeah, they will do that. Yeah, no, my startup idea was basically, 1Password. Mm-hmm. It's good password security in that. Same thing, but 2 passwords, twice as secure. You just put 2 passwords in to get through that first thing, and then you can have all your passwords.
I think you're not going to be able to sell it. I think the way that you sell it is half a password. Go smaller. 0 passwords. -1 passwords.
We tell you the password, and you tell us if that's okay. That's how you sign in. I like it.
You tell us, yeah, if we sent you the right password or not. You could do a multiple choice. We'll send you 3 passwords, and you click on the one that's real.
Yeah.
Isn't that how like certain background checks work for stuff? They'll like, when you're going through it or whatever, it's like, which of these addresses did you live at?
Oh, I hate those because...
it's like, this is not top secret information.
Well, 1, it's not top secret information. And then 2, it's like wrong. It'll like give me information that it's like it's tangled up with my spouse or something. And it's like, I never lived in that city. I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe my spouse lived there 20 years ago. Who knows?
But you have to lie then because you think you know what it's getting at. But
yeah, you have to guess what it is. It's like, I don't know.
Even if it's wrong. I thought you were saying, oh yeah, but it gets it wrong. But it's supposed to, isn't it? 2 of them are supposed to be wrong. Carl, you're like, I didn't live at these 3 addresses. These 2 are wrong. But that's the point of the check.
No, all 3 are wrong. Sometimes all 3 are wrong.
Oh yeah, if all 3 are wrong. Yeah, it's like when it says click all the bicycles and it's just a picture of a dog. And it's like, what? How do I get past? And then it takes a couple of hours and then you think, I can just click verify now or whatever. It was a trick one. And it worked. Believe it. That's when I got my 0s and 1s verification code though, so that cheered me up after. Well, dear listener, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Go Time. If you did, please tell all your friends about it. If you didn't, tell your enemies. Either way, let's talk about it. And then, you can tell them about Carl. And then they'll say, what? No, that's not real. And you say, no, listen. And they'll put it on and then they'll get to meet Carl in real life. So that'd be lovely for them. Well, that's it. Thanks, Carl, for coming back. Really appreciate it. Great to see you as usual.
Matt, I love that you needed somebody to be on a kind of wacky episode where we just sort of goof around and you thought of me. So thanks.
Yep. And of course, John Calhoun.
I don't think you thought of me. Let's not pretend here. Pretty sure Jared just forced me in here.
He needed somebody to be the straight man.
He's like, look, I can't let Matt go on his own. We got to put somebody there.
It's got to be some adult supervision.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that is all the time we have. We'll see you next time on Go Time. Bye, everybody. Bye.
All right, that's Go Time for this week. Thanks for listening. And thank you to listener Steve Nicklin for suggesting the topic for this episode. If you enjoyed the show, pass it on to someone else who might dig it too. We appreciate you helping us spread the word. Thanks once again to our partners Fastly and Fly for helping us bring Go Time to you each and every week. Check out what they're up to at fastly.com and fly.io. Thanks also to our Beatmaster in residence. We love you, BMC. Next time on Go Time, Natalie and Johnny reconvene for part 4 of our Hacking in Go series. Guests Justice Rage and Jags also return to share with us their hard-earned InfoSec knowledge. Stay tuned right here. We'll drop that episode in your podcast feed next week. Mm.